Let's get started right now by listening to something that Gene Simmons said about Rush.
When we first heard about Rush, this Canadian band, of course at the time, Canadian bands just didn't mean anything, respectfully, even though I'm now married to a newfie. That's my Canadian content. But when we first heard Rush, we were struck. It was like Canadian Led Zeppelin. Yeah! Oh, yeah! And this kind of high banshee thing with ba diddle 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 diddle. Yeah! Oh, yeah! This is before Neil Peart came in with before Neil took him to this other place. But initially, which is a big word like gymnasium, Rush was a hard rockin' band. It felt English. We thought they were English. And then they opened up for us on what became their debut tour outside of Canada. We took him to San Francisco and every place else. Loved the band.
Okay, so let's focus on the fact that he and Paul Stanley both often seem to suggest that the John Rutsey era of Rush was more to their liking than any other era. In other words, they both seem to favor the period of Rush when Rush sounded most like Led Zeppelin. Now, I have a couple of comments that I'd like to make on that account, but first I want you to listen to what Paul Stanley himself said. So let's listen in to what Paul Stanley said about Rush.
I think for us, Rush was most exciting, and we're kind of going off on a side tangent. When we first had them playing with us in Canada, and John Rutsey was still the drummer.
Wow.
The first album was it was Humble Pie, it was Zeppelin. They obviously found their footing in something they wanted to do later on. They were always great.
Okay, so both Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons are careful to say that Rush was a great band from the very beginning. They're a great band all the way through to the end. They found their own voice. They changed and evolved. But they also both seem to very strongly insinuate that they preferred Rush when they first started, when they were a riff-based, heavy rock band. Now, I want you to listen to some things that Neil Peart had to say about Rush. And this is just one interview. You can find many interviews where he says almost exactly the same thing about Rush's early albums compared to the post-Moving Pictures era. Let's listen in to what Neil Peart had to say.
I heard you once say that you wished Moving Pictures was your first album.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a lot of track before Moving Pictures too.
And a lot of them I like, and a smile of indulgence now. It's nothing bitter about it.
Yeah.
It's just like in prose writing is a perfect example. I spent 20 years learning before I had to publish my first book.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so much better because anything I wrote before that was experimental or learning, and it was sloppy and all over the shop and not focused on the reader or the voice or anything like that I eventually learned after 20 years. So that's really a matter of saying that by the time we learned to be a band, it was Moving Pictures, but there's lots of stuff before that I like, and even the quirky off the wall stuff I like I laugh at with a smile. You know, there's nothing bitter about it, but it's just that it would be nice to serve your apprenticeship first, as most professions allow, instead of in public.
So you couldn't get any more clear than that. He regards everything up to Moving Pictures as an apprenticeship. And he even went so far as to say they weren't really a band before Moving Pictures. Now, personally, I find this too extreme of a point of view, but it stands directly in opposition to what Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons are suggesting with their comments. So let's do this. Let's break Rush into not two, but three distinct phases. So we'll say the John Rutsey phase, when they were most like Led Zeppelin. Then the developing phase, when they were produced by Terry Brown and they were experimenting with longer epic tracks and concept albums and orchestration and all their different avenues of exploration that they went down before, according to Neil Peart, they reached the third and final mature period of Rush with Moving Pictures. Now, I realize that Terry Brown also produced Moving Pictures, but that album definitely marks a transition point from the second stage Rush to the third stage Rush. So now I would like to hear from you. Which era of Rush do you feel was the strongest? Leave your comments in the section below and tell me why. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say. I'm going to go ahead and give you my choice right now. And it's a little bit confusing because my favorite Rush album, as I've said over and over again, is Power Windows. But my favorite era of Rush would be the middle period. And my favorite album from that middle period would be A Farewell to Kings. So I feel that it's the middle period of Rush that is the best, although I like all three. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop in this section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.